Hi, good morning or good afternoon to you all. Thank you for joining us on this webinar hosted by Watchful Software and myself. My name is Rui Biscay. I'm responsible for product management and strategic account management at Watchful Software. For those who know me and know us, you will know that we are a software vendor that has developed a product called RightsWATCH, a security product, a data classification tool that enables you to classify all your unstructured data formats so that you better understand and be able to reason with that data. The purpose of today's is to provide some insights on how RightsWATCH is able to feed a security incident and event management tool, whatever that is, in order to extract the most value from one of those tools, from Splunk, QRadar, ArcSight, Logarithm, Power BI, or any other tool that is able to do correlations, that is able to do analysis on data. The basic principle underlying this webinar is that data is transformed into information and then on into knowledge and then on into wisdom. The idea is that during this 30 minutes, I'll be able to show you and provide some insights on how RightsWATCH is one of the fundamental sources of data for those correlations to happen. While we wait for a couple more people to join, and we had about 60 registrations for today's webinar, I would like to give you, provide you some of the rules or some insights about how this is going to work. We are recording this webinar, so basically there's no need for you to have information about what is going on. We will provide that information. We will provide you with a recording of the webinar later on our website, or if not today, tomorrow. You will always and also be able to see it on demand later on. And at the end of this webinar, I promise that I'll try and save a couple of minutes for us to have some sort of a QA session to discuss. The idea is for you to type in your questions on the webinar, GoToWebinar control panel on the right side of your screen, if I'm not mistaken, and then at the end I'll try and read from some of those questions, and to the best of my abilities I'll try to answer those. All of you are centrally muted, so there's no need for you to mute and mute yourself. The plan is that we are able to be listening in, and then at the end, by means of typing in your questions, I'll be able to answer, if not all of them, at least some of them. So moving on with the webinar, the idea, as I've said, is to show you or provide some insight on how RightsWATCH could be feeding your security incident and event management tool so that you can extract the best value proposition out of understanding who is handling sensitive information in your company and what is that person or those people doing with that sensitive information, and who has touched and who has printed and who has forwarded. So basically who has done what, when, and how with that data so that you can trigger remediation actions, or basically, if you can, if nothing else, do some sort of forensic analysis on those actions. But the idea, or to start from the beginning, as we should always do, is there a problem that needs to be addressed? And again, I don't want to spend that much time with these figures and data points, but the idea is that yes, there is. I don't care if you're a large enterprise, a small enterprise. I don't care if you're protected from a network type of approach to external threats. The idea is that if you're a large, small enterprise, in danger, and the idea is that you need to control those threat vectors, not just the ones that come from the outside, but also the ones that come from the inside. And those that are insider threats don't have to be hackers. Don't have to be people doing it on purpose. It can be each and every one of us that basically and bluntly does a mistake and basically says, I've sent this email to the wrong recipient, or I've saved these files to a wrong repository, or I've printed these files where I shouldn't have done that. So a lot of use cases and capabilities or worries that we need to be aware of in order to stop and tackle a security breach from happening. How do I do that? So what do I need to do to control that information disclosure? I mean, from a common sense, from a broader approach, you need to manage the users. You need to manage somehow the identities of the users, control who those are, and have information about them, provision, decommission, whatever. From a generalized approach, as we usually say from the helicopter view, you need to manage those users by whatever means, shape, or form that you have to do so. You need also to manage the devices. Inside the perimeter devices, outside the perimeter devices, you need to be able to manage the devices by any means, shape, or form. I mean, there's multiple ways in order to do this. The purpose of this webinar is not to show you or tell you how to do it. You probably know more of it than myself. The idea is that a combination of these two factors together with managing the information is paramount in order to control information from being disclosed in a way that is uncontrollable, in a way that you do not control where it goes. The idea is that there are multiple solutions, multiple tools, multiple approaches, multiple security protocols and whatnot that make these combinations happen, or allow you to control your users, to control your devices, and to control your information. And that is what we call the enterprise security puzzle. The enterprise security puzzle basically means that there's not a one-size-fits-all type of approach. Basically means that you need to have several things that combine each other and leverage each other in order to provide a 1 + 1 = 3 in terms of value proposition. The idea is that it is not just loss prevention or DLP that will solve your problem. It is not just DRM or data encryption that will solve your problem. It is not, definitely not, your MDM alone that will solve your problem. It is not the idea of data classification and even data discovery from a legacy data point of view that will solve your problem. And it's definitely not just analyzing where that data is and understanding and reason with where that data is that will solve your problem. The idea is that you need to combine several pieces of this very same enterprise security puzzle in order to allow that to happen. Data classification is what RightsWatch grants you. Data classification is what RightsWatch provides to this equation in this slide. The idea is that data classification is one of the pillars, if not one of the fundamental pillars, but one of the very strong and very important pillars of the puzzle. The idea is that you can tag, you need to provide structure to unstructured file formats. And when we talk about unstructured file formats, you talk about emails, you're talking about Words, Excels, PowerPoints, PDFs, CAD drawings, JPEGs, TIFF files, notepads, anything that is outside of a database. You need to be able to provide some structure. Why? Because other systems will need to be able to reason over that data and apply all sorts of policies on that data. Why? Because you need users to also to be able to understand, reason with, and play with, so to speak, with that data and understand what is going on. Why is that data sensitive in nature and why is it not sensitive in nature? And while you do that data classification, while you classify that data and you tag it on the metadata layer and also on the front layer, I mean on the headers and the footers and the watermarks and the tags and the colors and the borders and everything you add to the unstructured file format from a data classification and labeling standpoint will help, and this is where we come to the data analysis, will help a SIEM tool, a security incident and event management tool, do the reporting or provide and trigger mitigation actions or mitigating actions to prevent that event from continues to happen, or to stop it immediately if you detect, if you flag an event from happening that is going against a security policy. So data classification will enhance that data analytics capability. I mean, you can think of data classification as providing the food for thought that data analytics will live from in order to generate whatever policy, whatever report, whatever analytics that is capable on doing. And the way that RightsWatch does it from a generalized concept is by storing events on a SQL database on the server side that are able to be fed into any system. It doesn't have to be a fancy high-end security incident and event management tool, but any system, Excel for that matter, that is able to extrapolate information out of data and then knowledge and then wisdom and or whatever in terms of allowing you to understand what is going on and who is doing what, when, and how with those sensitive data. Extrapolating metrics, extrapolating and generating reports, flagging and generating alarms so that you can immediately stop something from happening that, might just go against corporate policy, or if you're not sure about it, you can go back and you can do some forensic analysis and understand, well, this thing happened, maybe I need to stop it from happening furthermore in future to come. From a generalized approach, this is what RightsWatch does to enhance your security incident and event management capabilities, your data analytics capabilities. Now let's go a little bit deep in terms of diving in understanding how, or better said, which events are captured, are logged by RightsWatch, because this is what we're talking about, the logging capability of RightsWatch, capable of feeding one of those tools to extrapolate those reports and to extrapolate that information and that knowledge and that wisdom out of those logs. So what is it that RightsWatch is capable of logging? And then I'll also try to provide some information about possible use cases that we've seen from our customers that are leveraging RightsWatch and the integration between RightsWatch and those correlation extrapolation tools in order to generate that added value. The monitoring interface of RightsWatch, the print screen that you see on your screen right now, it's basically the monitoring interface of RightsWatch. That monitoring interface, it's a completely segregated web-based interface that is, as I've said, completely segregated against the admin interface, the administration where the sysadmin will be able to set RightsWatch up. This is a completely segregated one that provides you some user activity events logging, some information tracking event logging, some admin activities event logging, and in particular cases where you're using data encryption, also some blacklisting capability. Let's focus on the user activity, information tracking, admin activity, and let's see exactly what is it that RightsWatch logs and how is it that you can extrapolate information out of those logs. One thing that you need to understand from the beginning is that from a conscious decision, a decision that was made from a product management standpoint in RightsWatch, RightsWatch will never be a dashboarding tool. RightsWatch will never be a reporting tool. RightsWatch will never be able to do those correlation analysis, that logging capability in terms of extrapolating information and knowledge and such out of those logs. We will capture those logs and we will be feeding those logs into other tools that you may wish to have or you're planning on having or that you already have in place in order to do just that. Because that's what those tools do. What we do is data classification and capturing logs. Then we feed those logs into those other technologies and tools that are tailored and developed in order to do well, it's their core business, which is to do those correlations. So when you go into the user activities tab on the RightsWatch, what you have is a way to search and filter from events, from classification levels, from in which application was this, what do you want to search for, which user, etc., etc., etc. And if you query the database from this interface here, this web-based interface, which is basically a query to the database, it provides you an activity log details. Now let's look into detail. What is it that this activity log detail provides as an information? It gives you information about, what was the event? What was the event that is being logged? Mark file means, in this case, that a file was classified, was labeled by RightsWatch with a particular classification level that we will know later on. Who was the user that did that? John Doe. John Doe, Jane Smith, whatever the login detail for that user was. Which was the application, the plugin in this case, in the terminology of RightsWatch, which was the application that was used to perform this event, this mark file event? It was the Global Protector. For those of you that are familiar with RightsWatch, basically you understand that Global Protector is the way for you to right-click a file and to classify a file without even having to open it, any type of file you can think of, or even doing it from the server-side component or even from a web component, kind of like a proxy approach, in order to capture those files, analyze the content and context of those files, and classify those files. Then you have current classification and original classification. On purpose, I decided to show you here an information tracking capability that has information about the previous classification of this file and the current classification of this file. Why is it important? Because in this case, you can see that under each one of those two things, you have the classification level, which was secret before and now it's public. So we're talking about someone that basically changed the classification, downgraded the classification of the file from secret into public. In itself, maybe this should trigger, an alarm, a report, something. Why would someone declassify, or better said, reclassify a file from secret into public? Maybe it's worthwhile understanding and knowing why that was. Then you have the combination of company scope and level on each one of those classification levels. Basically, the idea, if you're familiar with RightsWatch, is that RightsWatch gives you classification levels that can be aggregated into scopes of reference that can be aggregated into companies. One instance of RightsWatch enables you to set up a complex matrix of different levels of classification underneath different scopes, underneath different companies, if you so wish to, depending on how complex your organization is and depending on the role-based access control policies that you need to enforce on users or groups of users. What is the server date? What is the client date? I mean, when was this done? What is the host name? What is the path? Where is this file saved into now? Where was it saved before? And then also information about what is the version of the software, RightsWatch, that the user is running on this endpoint. Okay, there's also a unique identifier here, this bluish alphanumeric code here that has to do with data protection, that has to do in this particular case with the RMS encryption, the Rights Management Services encryption template that was used to protect this particular file on top of the classification. So what does that mean from a use case perspective? Okay, so I have all of those logs. Why would I need to dive into those logs? Well, first of all, you don't need to dive in. I've shown you what RightsWatch is capable to and show you if you wish to search for it on the web monitoring interface. Everything that you see there is stored in the SQL database, and basically you can plug that SQL database into any other tool, as I've said, Excel or anything else like Splunk, ArcSight, QRadar, Logarithm, Power BI, or anything like that in order to extrapolate and generate information, knowledge, and wisdom out of those logs. So let's take a particular use case from a user activity. Why would I care what is the user activity? Why would I care what are the events that are captured by RightsWatch that a user did? What if a user is reclassifying sensitive files in a bulk fashion? What if he or she is just reclassifying files because he or she is leaving the company the next day? What if that person is trying to steal trade secrets or leverage those trade secrets when going to work for another competitor company or whatever, because he or she wants to have and hold that information that he or she even may think that belongs to them, to he or she, because they were just doing it, right? The idea is that you may need to not only flag the event, but also to generate a report for forensic analysis. So you may need to flag it, right? Understand that it happened, and also go back and understand what was it that it happened later on. That may be just good enough. But also, you may want to be able to trigger risk mitigation actions in a timely fashion, which is now, so that you can lower or eliminate your corporate liability in case of a data leak. What could be those mitigation actions? Basically, you can reach out to the user, you can delete permissions from the user, you can change the role of that user, or even provide him or her with a segregated environment by which there's nothing that person can do more except what they already done, or even kill the access to those files that were reclassified, etc. So there are all sorts of use cases that you can think of depending on if you're going deep dive into encryption or not, or if you're using data classification alone or not. There's a lot of stuff that you can think of that are just interesting use cases to think on why you should use this combination between the logging capability of RightsWatch and a digesting between commas capability of those logs and turn them into information. So reclassification of sensitive files from secret into public. Why is that? Why is someone doing that? You need to understand, you need to act upon it. Another interesting use case that derives from knowing what the user did with that classified information is, for example, if I'm sharing sensitive files with non-corporate email domain accounts. So basically, if you want it in a plain English, what if I'm sending sensitive information to Gmail accounts or to Hotmail accounts or others? Right? What if that goes against corporate policy? If that defies corporate policy, I need not to flag the event, but I need to stop the email from actually being sent. Can RightsWatch do that? Yes. Can that be logged so that I understand who was the user that actually tried to do so? Yes, you can. Now, imagine that you have C-level execs that are just doing that because they want to reach out to their sensitive documents on their iPads or smartphones or whatever back home. Maybe they need to be allowed to do so because, well, let's face it, they're just C-level execs, and you need to allow them to do several stuff. The idea is that RightsWatch enables you to allow those users to do that, but demands that they sign a digital disclaimer for non-repudiation issues that, yes, they acknowledge, or by which they acknowledge that they are going against corporate policy, and they acknowledge that by doing so, it's on their own risk. If they do that, not only do you get the record, you get the log of that, and you can look back and flag it and stop it and whatnot, but you can also decrease your corporate liability because basically you're putting the emphasis of the decision-making process on the user and not on corporate policy. Information tracking is the next screenshot that I have to share you. Basically means that you can isolate the variable document. So instead of isolating the user, you can say, okay, what if I know that there's highly sensitive document, that I know it's named that thing or it has a specific classification or something. Who touched that? Who printed that? Who read that file, right? Who reclassified that file? And this is a way that RightsWatch provides you. Again, you have an interface for this. Do you need to go into that interface? Not really. If you're feeding this into other systems, there's really no need for you to go into here. All of this is stored on that database. But, let me give you just two use cases. Or why is this important? If you want to know who saved those sensitive documents into, let's say, Dropbox, iCloud, OneDrive, whatever that is, cloud-based drives, what if you know that those sensitive documents are being shared via personal cloud-based drives, and that may defy, may be going against corporate policy? Do you want to know that? Do you want to understand who did that? Do you want to understand when that was done, et cetera, et cetera? Or you can even generate some mitigation actions like deploying data discovery agents that will scan your network and trying to, classify or even gather information about where those are, or even set up your cloud access security broker appropriately to prevent that from a proxy perspective from happening further on down the road. Another use case is who printed those sensitive documents. Imagine that you have a shared printer on an open space somewhere. Someone is just late for a meeting but needs to print those highly sensitive documents to take to that meeting. What if you can control and stop and even understand who was the person that is actually printing sensitive documents either by looking at the hard copy of that document or just by looking at those logs or understanding what of those reports that were generated or those dashboards and flagging capability that was done by your security incident and event management tool. There also, and to finalize this slide deck before I open up for discussion a couple of minutes before we end up out of time, the idea is that you have also the admin activity. Why is this important? The admin activity are the persons or the people that are granting users credentials, that are people that are defining those policies on the other backend that I've talked to, that I did not show you, but that I talked to on this webinar. The idea is, can I control, can I understand, can I reason with the logs, the events of those admins so that I understand that there's nothing fishy going on, or that I don't have an admin that is granting a user permissions that he or she should not have, or granting him or her some sort of wrongful credential or wrongful profiling on the system, etc., etc., etc. Can all or the same details be logged by the admin? The answer is yes. This is just one example of that log activity details. Is it, beautiful? No, it isn't. Is it, easy to understand and easy to digest? No, it isn't. That was not the purpose. That is definitely not the purpose of this capability and this web-based interface of RightsWatch. The idea is that it can give you a way to query the database if you so wish to. You can even export those into, CSV file formats, and if you like to do it, just analyze those in an Excel spreadsheet format. But there's also ways in the back end, as I've said, to plug this into your security incident and event management tools so that you can extrapolate and gather all the information needed from those logs. Last slide, last information on this webinar, and I promise to be brief, so I will save a couple of minutes before the end in order to answer any questions that may arise on the GoToWebinar questions QA panel on the right side of your screen, is to tell you that RightsWatch is, if nothing else, a policy-driven data classification and labeling tool. Right? If you need to say, okay, but what is it that RightsWatch does? It's a policy-driven data classification and labeling tool that enforces role-based access control policies over sensitive information from a production and consumption standpoint, that adds dynamic watermarking and tagging, and that's a little bit of the labeling that you have up there. There's also the need to integrate and the ability to integrate RightsWatch with other technologies out there, such as, mobile device management, rights management, data loss prevention, data discovery, etc., etc. The list goes on and on and on, so that a joint solution amongst those tools derives of better value proposition. The comprehensive audit trails from a logging perspective that can be fed into other systems to do that information generation, gathering, and also that knowledge, etc., but also the ability for you to do those forensic analysis later on. And last but definitely not least, the ease of use, the capacity to integrate with your system out there, the capacity to understand what's going on, and the capacity to show to the users that it's really, really easy and not impact in any way, shape, or form in their workflow in order to achieve that data classification, in order to capture those logs, in order to allow you to understand what went on and what happened. This is the last slide. This was the last slide that I had to show you. I'm now going to try and open the Q&A session here. Let me see if there's a question. I see one question here that I'll try to answer in the 2 minutes that I have. So the question is from John: is there a way to plug this into any SIEM, or is it limited to the ones that are supported? Well, we don't have connectors, so to speak, with Splunks or ArcSight or anything like that. There's no connectors. Why? Because there's no need to have so. What we have is, for example, config files that you can run and automatically pops up a few dashboards on your system, like Splunk, for example. And what we also have is the ability to help you in fetching the information or in setting it up so that the fetching of information is as powerful and as streamlined as possible. The idea is that whatever you use, we can play along. The idea is that RightsWatch in itself will not replace those systems that you have or planning on having. So the idea is to provide you with some information or logging information that you can use. Another question is, are you using standard syslog capability to integrate with other tools? Well, basically the answer is yes. Perhaps you could mention there's information that I cannot read, but has to do with partnerships. Basically, what I can tell you is that we are setting up partnerships with tools out there that are outside of the scope of what I've just explained. Basically, not outside of the scope because they cannot do it, but basically outside of the brands that I've been referring to, other brands that are able to do just that. The correlation of the logs, extrapolation of information and knowledge, and the ability to then deploy and trigger actions that will tackle and mitigate the risk factor behind some of those actions of the users. RightsWatch alone will never do that. RightsWatch together with those other tools will. This ends the webinar for today. We had allocated 30 minutes for it, so basically we've made it. As I've said, you have the recording, or we will have the recording available on the website. If not today, tomorrow, you will be able to watch it on demand. And if there's ever a need for us to set up a call or a follow-up inquiry in order to understand exactly how this is done, just reach out to your regional sales director of Watchful or to any of the network of partners that we have available around the world in order for us to show you this. Thank you very much. Thank you for attending. I hope you can join us next time.